I see it is 1 o'clock. Once again, welcome everyone to the Attorney Recruitment webinar for the IRP program. We are glad you are here this afternoon. I will go ahead and just do some orientation to this web room if you're not familiar with all things Adobe Connect Pro here. I see many of you have found that chat box. Please continue to type in the chat, the county you work in there, as Wendy posted that right up front. I'm Rick Sechtman. I work with UNC's School of Social Work, specifically the Family and Children's Resource Program. I will be the facilitator today. We're glad you are joining us. A little bit about this webinar. It was made possible by funding from North Carolina's Court Improvement Program, part of the AOC. It was developed and presented by the Office of the Parent Defender and the Family and Children's Resource Program here at the UNC School of Social Work. Some goals for the webinar today. So by the end of this webinar, we hope you'll know more about the plan for bringing IRP program to North Carolina, the importance of partnership across stakeholders in this work, the requirements and expectation for interested attorneys, and next steps for applying. So just to communicate with us, again, it looks like many of you are finding that chat box just fine. That'll send a chat to everyone by typing in the bottom of that chat box as you're doing of what county you work for. You can do a private chat if there's, for example, something you want to address directly to Wendy or the hosts. That would be me and those that are providing technical assistance behind the scenes here. You'll see a little plus sign at the top of the chat box, and that'll give you the opportunity to send a more private chat to somebody or question directly to someone. All right, about questions. So we are going to be monitoring this chat box. As our presenter is going over the information, we will be tracking your questions throughout this webinar. We'll look for opportunities to answer them within the webinar. And if nothing else, we do have some time set aside at the end of the webinar slides to try and address any questions that are remaining. Also, a recording of this webinar will be made available on our website. So you'll see the link there that will take you to the Family and Children's Resource Program website, where you will find this recording posted pretty shortly after. Hopefully early next week we should have this up and available. There is also the introduction to the IRP program webinar that is already posted there, if you haven't had the opportunity to review that. To get our attention. So just another opportunity to check in with us. At the very top of your toolbar there, you'll see a hand raised. There's a little drop down next to that. So for example, if you want to tell us to speak louder, just use that drop down. You'll see there's indication for that where you can tell us to please speak up, speak louder. So we'll look for that as well if there's any indicators as we go along throughout this presentation. And Philip, there is a question about how to get this on a mobile device. We do have technical support behind the scenes that will try and work with you in the chat box there. If you're having a difficult time hearing or seeing in the presentation, we'll try and work with you on that. All right, so again, I want to welcome you all. I'm not Crystal Coble. Pinch hitting for Crystal Coble. I'm Rick Sechtman with UNC's Family and Children's Resource Program. We have technical help from Philip Armfield and John McMahon. And if you don't know her already, let me introduce our presenter, Wendy Sotolongo, the Parent Defender at the North Carolina Indigent Defense Services. Wendy, you want to jump in here and introduce yourself?
Thank you. We'll just go back to that one for a minute. Thank you so much. My name is Wendy Sotolongo, and I'm the Parent Defender with Indigent Defense Services. I recognize almost all of these names on the chat list, and I'm very happy that you're here. I did want to remind everyone that this is for parent attorneys. We had the orientation last week, which was for all of our court partners. So I would ask that if you are not a parent attorney, that you would please exit or send us a chat, and we can work with you on that. But this really is geared to the parent attorneys. So thank you. Welcome again. Like I said, I am Wendy Sotolongo, the Parent Defender for Indigent Defense Services in North Carolina. We are so grateful that you are here today on giving up some of your Friday on a gorgeous day outside, at least here in Durham, North Carolina. It is gorgeous. I would be remiss if I did not say thank you to both the Court Improvement Program and to the UNC School of Social Work. They've been amazing partners and collaborators through this process and have really helped me to just maintain my excitement about this and my interest in sharing where we're going with you. So let's get started. As last week, we had some overview webinars that really talked about what interdisciplinary representation is. So we'll do a very quick recap because hopefully most of you were able to listen to one of those, listen to that or participate in it. So interdisciplinary representation really is pairing of a social worker with the parent attorney. And so this social worker is not affiliated with the Department of Social Services. This is an independent social worker who is considered to be part of the attorney team. And because they are part of the attorney team, the confidentiality parameters extend to that social worker, and they really are considered to be as part of the attorney's team as much as a paralegal or a legal assistant. That the social worker kind of fits in that same category. So interdisciplinary representation allows attorneys to really focus on the legal aspect of representing their client and allows them to share some responsibilities with the social worker. So some examples would be that the attorney could certainly focus more on court preparation, gathering discovery, creating motions, negotiating settlements, in preparing the client for court, either to participate in court or to explain what's going to happen. The social worker can do a lot of the things that attorneys either do now or who would like to do it but don't have the time to do it. And that really is attending some of the out-of-court meetings that occur in our cases, really counseling and working with the client to have them succeed in their case plan and comply with the court order to achieve their goals, to look out for resources that will help the client achieve their goals. So these are some of the things a social worker can do as part of the attorney's team. And of course, a big part of it is ongoing team communication. So that's a little recap of what it is. And this is also a bit of a recap, but I just think it's very important that we understand a little bit more what it is that we are offering when we start this program and hopefully come to your county sooner than later. So what does it look like? Well, you know, a lot of it is going to depend on the allegations. Every one of these cases has its own set of facts. It has its own the allegations of the petition often guide what kind of services are going to be required and what kind of steps are going to need to be taken for the client to successfully navigate the child welfare system. So for example, you know, if you get a petition and you look at it, and let's say you're appointed to represent the mom, and you see that there's allegations of domestic violence in the home. You see that there's allegations that the mother is both financially and emotionally dependent upon the the partner where the domestic violence is perpetrating. And so that's going to lead you to one set of services that the client needs. So a social worker, if you have a social worker in that situation, that social worker could be working with the client to secure housing, to possibly learn job skills, to help with the job employment prospects and seeking out ways to be financially self-sufficient. So that could be one set of one type of case that a social worker might work on with one set of services they might be looking at. Many of our cases deal with substance use. You could get a petition that comes in and it's pretty straightforward. The client's got a pretty severe substance use issue, and that's causing the children to not either be properly supervised or properly cared for. And so that, of course, leads to a whole different set of services that are needed. And that client is going to need a lot of encouragement and participate in substance use treatment and getting to those treatment sessions, in complying with any kind of drug screening that is put in place by the Department of Social Services. So those would be a different set of services that the social worker would provide. So it really kind of depends on what the allegations are. But this slide will also help you understand that regardless of the allegations, there are some themes that kind of recur throughout it. And the three themes are that we are asking that the social worker will be providing the parent support. They will be helping the attorney with interviewing and investigating potential witnesses, potential kin providers, potential supports for the client, and acting as an advocate throughout with the community, with service providers, and with other core players such as the guardian ad litem or the DSS social worker. We also really want the social worker to be a part of the team, to not only be a part of the attorney's team, but be part of the client's team of someone who's looking out and advocating for them. And so they would be maintaining contact with the social worker, the agency social worker, to ensure that proper referrals are being made, to follow up and let the DSS social worker know of any of the positive steps that the client has made. We have the same with the volunteer guardian ad litem. I know all of you are very experienced with the situation where you'll read reports and you'll see the guardian ad litem will frequently go with the social worker to visit the foster home. There's that kind of relationship there. We would like to see our social workers, the contract social workers, develop a relationship where they can say, hey, guardian ad litem, come with me to visit the parent's home, and really get to know the parent in that perspective, kind of advocate for the parent with the other court players. We really would like to see these social workers be part of their community where they're doing the contract work so that they can learn what the resources are there. For example, you have that domestic violence client who is trying to secure her own housing. She's going to need furniture. She's going to need assistance for security deposits. She's going to need assistance to get utilities turned on. And there are a lot of community resources out there through churches and nonprofits and other non-NGOs that can provide that assistance, but need to know them so that they can be tapped into. Saying not just that type of assistance, but also like who are the service providers out there? If you have a client, a young client, a teen parent, they may need parenting or therapy and might prefer someone who is a younger therapist, might relate better to them. You might have a client who would prefer to have a therapist of color. You might have a client who prefers to have a therapist that has a faith-based background. And all of these will help the client succeed more if they're actually able to connect with that type of person and that type of service. And so we really would hope that because the social worker is part of the community, they'll kind of learn a lot of that about the community. We'll hope that the social worker will help the attorney kind of understand. We pick up a lot as attorneys where all of our trainings often have non-legal aspects to them, learning how to communicate with our clients, understanding the role of trauma plays in our clients and the relationship with our clients. So we learn a lot of it, but really ultimately we are not social workers. And so we can look to the social workers as part of the team to help us and better understand what is going on with our client. So those are some of the things that we really hope for that this new program is going to bring. But what are some of the other expectations that might not be so obvious? One thing is, and we've talked about this at the orientation, is that we really would like to set this up so that the social worker that is part of the attorney team is not considered a court person. And the reason for that is twofold. One is that it does change the relationship between the client and the social worker if the social worker is getting on the stand and testifying about the client at every hearing, much like we try to keep therapists of our clients off the stands because it really does impact the relationship. And two, is just a very practical reason. We have limited funds to do this. If we're having to pay for social workers and we're paying them by the hour to sit in court and wait for their turn to testify, it's going to eat up a lot of the funds that we really want to be used toward actual social work between the client, the parent, and the social worker. So for that reason, we are really going to try to set this up so that the expectation is that this social worker does not testify, does not write reports in order to avoid trying to be called to the stand. So how does that look from you guys' perspective as attorneys saying, I've got this great source of information who's had all this contact, I want to be able to put the social worker on the stand. Well, what we're hoping is that through further trainings and further kind of discussions around this, that it will be reach the kind of that communication goal of really knowing what the social worker knows and then figuring out a way to get that out, that information to the court, whether that is preparing the client to testify, whether that's bringing in a service provider that the social worker recommends come in to testify, whatever it could be, but to find a way to get the information to the court that it's not through the social worker testifying. And we know that doesn't mean it's never going to happen. And I get that. There's times you're going to have to put the social worker on the stand. There's times where the other parties are going to call the social worker to testify and subpoena. But we really do want to kind of start off with the understanding that that is not the goal. A lot of questions have come up about when we did the orientation. I think a lot of the social workers who work for agencies expressed a lot of concerns about that this social worker was going to have information that the agency social worker wasn't going to have, and that was going to be kind of used as a gotcha when it got to court and court reports. And, the contract social worker, we certainly hope that they develop collaborative relationships and professional relationships with the agency social worker, that we would be looking for them to share all the client's positives. We'd be looking for them to share with the DSS social worker what the client's needs are, because it still is, as this third bullet says, it is the job of the DSS social worker to make those referrals and to really ensure that the client needs what they have to comply with the case plan. So we hope that through the collaboration that the contract social worker, the IRP social worker, is not doing the work of the DSS social worker, but is instead focusing on advocating for the client with the DSS social worker and with the other court players in that client's case. And I did note, and we'll get into this much more in depth as we move on in this program in developing in picking the counties and doing further trainings, what are the confidentiality exceptions, how does mandatory reporting fit in? So those are things that we recognize we will be addressing in future trainings. So now we kind of have a little bit of an idea of what it's going to look like, kind of maybe what might happen if you have a social worker on your team, why it might be a really exciting thing to have that extra set of eyes and extra brain and extra hands to help. How are we going to get there? The reason we are able to get to this point of adding social workers to the parent attorney teams is because we have finally succeeded in entering into a memorandum of agreement to draw down new funds from the federal government, the Children's and Family Administration for Children and Families. And the way that it works is that about 2.5 years ago, the ACF changed their policy and allowed organizations that represent parents and organizations that represent children to submit the costs of that representation to the federal government for a partial reimbursement. And so it's taken 2 years to really work out the terms to make sure that we're compliant with the policy and to make sure that we protect the attorney-client relationship, that we protect the confidentiality. But we have reached agreement on all of these points, and so we now have an MOU in place that will start drawing down funds. The MOU specifically says that the funds will be used for two purposes, and one is to increase the rate of the parent attorneys. I apologize, our afternoon train is coming by. That one will be to increase the rate for parent attorneys, but even with that really needed increase, we know that we believe that there will be enough funds in addition to that to begin this program. So we are now able to start this program because we have new funds. And the great thing about these funds is they cannot supplant existing funds, so they have to be used to add to what the funds we already have and not replace the funds we get from the General Assembly. So we will start off by hiring an MSW who will be in my office because, as I stated earlier, I am not a social worker and I would not be competent or qualified to be able to supervise or mentor the contract social workers that we will get on board. So that will be the first step. And then kind of during that same hiring process and bringing that person on board, we're going to be going forward with the application process by the parent bars of those counties that have decided that they're interested in having this come to their county as part of the initial cohort. So we will be kind of simultaneously getting those applications, determining which counties we're starting with, and having the social worker in my office come on board. What will it look like the process once we select the counties and have the contract social workers on board? Then it is our hope that we will have several social workers for each county, because we obviously have to account for caseloads and we have to account for conflicts, and we certainly want to have more than one social worker available. The request process will be a written application, an online application, and we will basically, a parent attorney will get a petition. They will look at the allegations. They will say, oh, this is something I really think my client will benefit from having this independent social worker, and you'll request that. If we are able to accommodate that request, then we will say, here's the social worker who's going to be working with your team, with you, to represent this client. And we'll get a little bit more into that later. So when you get that petition and you look at it, if I was still practicing, I'd probably say every one of my cases would benefit from having a social worker, and that would be lovely, and hopefully that will be a goal that we will achieve at some point in time, but we don't have the resources or funds to start out that way. So we have narrowed it a little bit so that when you do ask for a social worker to assist you with your case and help your client, we're going to restrict that to cases where only neglect or dependency is alleged. In the beginning, we will not be accepting requests for contract social workers if there are allegations of abuse. Likewise, and this is probably the same petitions, if there will be some petitions where DSS, it's clear that they are asking from the get-go to be relieved of any reunification efforts because of alleging aggravated circumstances, and we will not be accepting referrals on that. So we will only accept those where neglect and dependency are the allegations, and the plan is reunification. Of course, that's still the vast majority of our cases, and we know that, but we did feel like we needed to at least narrow it a little bit. And we're going to be looking to have these social workers come on the case early. There's really nothing, it's just not as successful of a model and is not as helpful for the client if you wait a year and you're at permanency planning and the goal, the permanency plan is now adoption, to bring in a social worker at that point, because so much has already happened that can't be undone. What we want is these social workers to get in early, to really work with the clients early, to keep them motivated, to keep them interested, to keep services, the appropriate services, referral made, and encouraging the clients to reach their goals. So we will we are looking for requests that will be made early, even certainly before the initial disposition, since that's kind of the order that sets the tone of the case. We want the clients to know that even if the attorney thinks it would be wonderful to have a social worker, that it is a voluntary program, and one of the first things that the social worker will do after meeting with the attorney or communicating with the attorney is to meet with the client and to let the client know what their role is, that they are not part of DSS, that they're part of the attorney team, but that it's voluntary, and that we would expect the client to sign an agreement that they would want this service, and of course they can revoke that agreement at any time. What is in place to support the IRP? So we've talked a little bit about what it looks like, what the social worker might do to help you. We've talked a little bit about how you would actually access getting the services of a contract social worker. So let's back up a little bit. What is actually in place to make sure that this is going to be a successful program? What are we looking for from you, and what questions do you have of us? So I feel like we have really worked hard to make sure that this program has everything it needs to succeed. And some of these are some of those pieces. One is, as we said early on, is the partnership with UNC and CIP. Court Improvement Program has just been a wonderful court partner for many, many different projects that we've been doing in the child welfare court system over the years. And they've been very supportive. In fact, this is going to be their primary project for the next few years, in terms of making sure that this project has the support it needs to get off the ground and to expand and to succeed. When I first started to really try and figure out how we're going to get this program going, it just occurred to me that the smartest place to go would be the people who are already training the agency social workers and are already deeply involved in the policy and other aspects of child welfare. So they have been, as I said earlier, just great partners. They have They have already developed tools. They've already developed resources by using models from other states. They have developed an implementation guide that's going to help the initial cohort of counties to implement the model. And we're hoping that this guide should be used by the attorneys and the social workers. And it's going to be a kind of a living document that we're going to get feedback as this program progresses, and we have issues pop up that we need to work through, that we can update that guide so that it will be made available when we start expanding it. It will be even a better resource. So we talked already about the 4E funding agreement and that is in place. And the nice thing about that, I don't think I mentioned, is it's not capped. So actually, as we increase this program, then we can submit even more invoices for reimbursement. So our reimbursements will increase and we can continue to expand this program. And finally, it would certainly be remiss without acknowledging that there's a number of other states that have this practice in place, and they have been amazingly wonderful, giving of their time and giving of their materials that they have. And really want to especially shout out to Washington State and Colorado for giving us a ton of helpful information that we were using to get our program started off. What is our timeline? Well, the one thing that people know me that I'm always eternally optimistic, but then I'm often having to adjust to the reality of outside forces. So we had really hoped that by October 1, we would have the sites selected, we would have an MSW on board, we would be recruiting contract social workers, and we would be ready to go. That's next week, next Friday. That's not going to happen. So we are really, we have this phase 1. We didn't change this because we just feel like I have to have some urgency to keep this going, and so we can get it off the ground as quickly as possible. So I would say we're probably at least 30 days behind, hopefully not more. But it really is our goal to have this up and running in the initial counties this fall. So what are the next steps? The next steps are a lot of that we've talked about, some of these bullets, that we do have an application process. We are not going to be sending that out quite yet, but that is something that will be the next step. And the other further steps that are coming is that once we select the counties, that we're going to have additional trainings because we really want to be able to work through scenarios, like what does it look like when you and a social worker are working together for a client, and giving some specific questions and how you would work through. And we also want the attorneys to recognize that we are going to be providing some additional training just for the social workers and some coaching opportunities for them. So I think it's really important for everyone who's on this call and anyone who's going to be part of the initial set of counties that is participating in this, is that we are really looking for a lot of partnership. I really hope that this is something that you're excited about, and I'm excited about it. I think it's a great resource for attorneys, and I think it's a great resource for clients. But it is going to be a learning experience for those of us who are starting it, because we haven't had it here except for in very limited places in North Carolina. So we are going to be looking for kind of 3 levels of partnership. We certainly have the collaboration between the parent bar and the counties that it's starting off in, and my office and the UNC School of Social Work. We really need to be able to collaborate together. We need to hear all of your questions and problems and concerns and successes and suggestions, And, we need, and then that will help us to evaluate and to improve the program. We'll be looking for, in the initial counties, we really are looking for a high level of collaboration between the parent attorneys in your county. We are not going to be doing this just for one attorney in the county. This is something the parent bar really needs to come together and say, we want to do this, and to kind of work on the application together. I don't really see that as an issue everywhere I go, and all the attorneys I talk to, that's one thing that just comes across loud and clear, is that the parent bars across the state are pretty uniformly very cohesive and collaborative and really work together. So, but it is something that we'll be looking for as we decide which counties we start in. And then, of course, the last thing would be a commitment to that kind of partnership and collaboration between the attorney and the IRP social worker. That it's just a new, we get this. This is a new form of representation. The social worker is going to be doing things that many of you have been doing on your own, such as talking to service providers or kind of like doing the encouragement of your client to participate in services, to attend some of these meetings at DSS. So it's going to be a change that we all need to figure a way through, and we're really looking for a commitment from the parent attorneys that they understand that this is an important collaboration that has to occur between the attorney and the social worker, and that you will need to put in the time to establish the relationship and nurture it over time. You're going to get to know these social workers really well. They're going to get to know you really well. And I think it's a partnership that is going to be incredibly helpful and enriching. But it is definitely going to take some work to get through it, to get to that point. So I hope that you're still here, and that means that you are interested in learning more and possibly even working with your fellow parent attorneys in your county, or maybe if you're in a small county with your district, to do the application. We want to let you know what some of the other aspects of it are. I feel like this is going to be a great resource, but I also recognize that it's not just going to come with no extra work on your part. So we recognize that what I hope for is that it is ultimately much more, you get much more benefit from it than the extra work. We are going to, when the counties are picked, one of the other understandings that we need to understand is that we will enter into contracts with the parent attorneys in that bar and in that county. And the reason we do that is because, well, several reasons. One is we don't want you to have to worry about BAPs that include work around this program. We don't want you to worry about any of that time being questioned or cut or anything. So we would be entering into a contract with the parent attorneys so that IDS will pay them directly. Part of the agreement of the contract will be that you will enter data that we need to have to really show what we hope to show is the success of this program, and that outcomes are better, and that permanency is achieved faster, and that there's fewer TPRs. So we will need to collect that data. So it will require you to enter into an online system what happens at a hearing and what happens at the conclusion of a case, so that we can kind of document some of those outcomes. The contract will also have some of these other things that we've talked about, which is that the social worker is part of the team, and that we do not expect you to have to supervise social workers, that you understand that if you have any concerns or any issues with the social worker, that the social worker supervisor and our program manager in my office will be working to respond to you and to resolve those. I see there's some questions and I appreciate them. I'm going to probably finish up here and then we'll get to those. So we've talked a lot about these. Just want to make sure we cover all of it. Is that if your county is selected, that we would look to you to help us recruit the social workers. We really feel like this is something that will be seen, that will be well received. I think that there are social workers out there who would love to have this type of practice, that they would be able to focus just on one, their clients. And unlike the agency social worker, they don't have to really try to balance the needs of the children with the needs of the mother, the father, the relative, the foster parents, and not to mention agency rules, state policies and regulations. So it really is kind of a much simpler role, and I think it would appeal to a lot of social workers that they really can focus on helping a client succeed without having to really worry and balance all those other factors. And you guys know your social workers, you know who might be a really good person that might be interested in doing this. So we would look to you to help us on that. Once we've got the social workers in place, we talked a little bit about having trainings both for you and the social workers together to learn to know each other, to work through some of these communication issues. And then also that we would be having some separate trainings just for the social workers, including some coaching sessions. And that is kind of where we are at this point. We don't have all the answers, and we definitely need your feedback, and we definitely need your questions. And so let's get to some of those right now, which is, the first one is, how are the district court judges responding to the idea of this program? Big sigh. We, as often with new programs, we have run the gamut. I had immediately had some judges reach out to me after the orientation sessions last week, express great interest in bringing it to their county, expressing that they recognize how hard that this is a hard job for parent attorneys, that these are hard cases, and that any resources that we can add for the parent and the parent attorney, that they're supportive of it. I love that. I love that reaction. It warms my heart. There were some other reactions that had a lot more concerns and were not necessarily as open to the idea. So it runs the gamut, and that is something that we would be looking to, that my office would be talking to the bench as we do our process of selection, that we would be, and after we select, that we would be talking to the bench and trying to address those concerns and trying to address any problems before they happen, any barriers, get rid of any barriers. Another question, how many cases can a social worker handle? Who gets to decide which case should be assigned to a social worker? And you would think I'd have that answer by now, because that question has been asked every single webinar, but we don't have the answer yet of how many cases can a social worker handle. We are certainly going to be looking toward national guidelines. We want the social workers to have sufficient time to really devote whatever time is needed to assist the client in achieving their goals and having them be successful. So we're going to be looking to what kind of national standards there are for social worker caseloads, and we do not want to exceed them. So that, and then of course it also depends on whether the social worker wants to have a full-time contract or a part-time contract, because I can certainly see that there would be social workers out there who don't want to work full-time because of either they've already retired or they have family obligations, but would love to have a part-time contract. Who gets to decide which cases should be assigned by social worker? Again, the parent attorney is going to be requesting that of our office, that service, and we're going to be asking basically for a copy of the petition so that we can see what the allegations are. We're going to be looking at kind of why you think it would be helpful in this particular case. And then we're going to look at what is the caseload of the social workers in that county already? Does anyone have availability? It doesn't have a conflict, and that we would then that would be the way we would make that decision. Ed asks, what's the mechanism for preventing a social worker from testifying? How do I know DSS won't call them? You don't. We've really got to figure this out, and we're going to look to how Durham has had this program in place since I was practicing. They've had a full-time social worker on staff in the public defender's office, and she never testified in court when I was practicing. So we've got to figure out how they were able to do that. But the bottom line to your question is we can't prevent it. If somebody wants to subpoena the social worker, or if the parent attorney decides that there's absolutely no other way to get the information out, then the social worker is going to testify. And so we understand that. But I think what we're trying to do is create an understanding through education and really talking with the other court partners about how to avoid that, and with the parent attorney as well. Other questions?
Please continue to type your questions into the chat box if you have any, and one of them that I saw earlier was about the slide presentation. So while you're doing that, I wanted to put the file share box there. You should see on your screen there, that is the presentation. You can click where it says download, save the slides to your computer. So I will leave that there for a moment so you can download the slides. And certainly type any additional questions you have into the chat box.
And one other thing I wanted to say, because I'm just looking at who's here, and looking at where the counties that you typed in and where you practice. If I don't know you personally, then I love that we've got a wide variety of counties, and that is something that we're going to be looking for when we pick anywhere from 3 to 6 counties or judicial districts to start this in. We are looking for, we want a good mix of urban and rural. We want a mix of places that have a lot of cases, places that don't have as much court or cases. We want to really be able to figure out whether this program needs to be tweaked to address different geographic and different agencies. So I think it's really wonderful to see that we've got everything from, we've got Carteret to, trying to figure out the furthest west one, but we have a good range here, so I really appreciate that.
There is a question regarding next step.
Yeah, what is the next step? The next step is to complete the working with UNC School of Social Work to complete the application. It's almost complete. We're going to be doing the application at the same time that we are recruiting the MSW for our office, for my office. So we will be doing that. Anybody who is on this, who is here today, and anyone who was here yesterday, and anyone who emails me or the UNC School of Social Work, or we're going to get the word out that we are ready to take applications, and so we're hoping to get that out probably in a few weeks. So I need a little bit of time to get some other things in place and get that completed.
Say if you are interested in the application process, please type your email contact into the chat box. We'll capture that so we can communicate with you. And then, of course, let me put this up. Here's Wendy's direct email address too. If you're interested in an application, but maybe you have some additional questions, you want to reach out to Wendy directly. There is Wendy's contact information too. Thank you. I see some of you are typing in the chat now your contact
Yeah.
information if you're interested. Application.
Ed asks, is this county or district specific? I would say that it is mostly county specific because we just, again, want the social worker to really be very knowledgeable of that community. And so certainly the counties you practice in are big enough for it to just be one county for a contract for this program to come to. We've had some discussion from the kind of Carteret, Pamlico, and Craven have had an excellent turnout yesterday and today, and I shout out to you guys for that. And they are in a very small, I mean, they're big geographically, but small population-wise and small kind of DSS case-wise. So they may choose to band together and say, with all of us together, there's enough to support pulling in several social workers under contract to help to assist them. So I would say, we're open to both. I think primarily it's going to be single county unless there's a reason to do it otherwise.
We do have just a few minutes left. If there are any additional questions, certainly type them in the chat. Otherwise, continue to also provide your contact information, your email, if you're interested in the application process.
Yeah. Julie, thanks for your question. Yeah, I think it's great to contact the judges and encourage them to maybe listen to last week's webinar, which was recorded, or one of the three was recorded and is available, or at least show them your slides or tell them what you've learned. In terms of the organizing the parent bar, you've got great public defenders who are parent attorneys. I know that Catherine Constantino just joined the public defender's office to represent parents, and of course Jane has been there and one of our most experienced parent attorneys. So I think they would be very excited to help you guys organize if that's what you wanted to do, and talk to the other attorneys about getting that done. I mean, basically, Julie, you can tell them that we're trying to get a Vivian for parent attorneys in Durham. So Vivian is the name of the social worker who is on the staff of the Durham County Public Defender's Office and was kind of my first encounter with this mode of representation. All right, well, thank you.
Yeah, I see maybe just one or two more individuals typing right now. While you are typing, any final comments, questions, suggestions, all that, I will do that too. I will say thank you. Thank you very much to our presenter, to Wendy. Thanks to all of you for attending today. We look forward to being in contact with you regarding the application process.